bird feeder, an oasis. That's what Penny imagined her disused window box would be. A haven for wandering birds, a place of comfort and safety, and yes, naturally, the more pressing reason for them to alight, a source of sustenance. And for Penny, sitting alone in her kitchen, gazing across that span of dingy linoleum, it promised the moan-worthy pun of a bird's eye view. Not only of the ordinary house sparrows bound to appear, but, with any luck, the cheerful plumage of finches and grosbeaks. Interfering with natural selection, she would provide a season of abundance that gave them better odds. Those less capable in severe conditions would now easily survive, building nests and raising chicks of less glorious proportions, less perfectly adapted, perhaps, but no less worthy of a peaceful moment on her windowsill or in the neighboring plum tree whose branches reached into her sliver of yard. Admittedly, the winters were mild, but that, in and of itself, didn't mar her sense of purpose. Once, when the plum tree was in fruit, she'd happened upon a hooded oriole while taking out the recycling. Its underside was bright as a school bus, its mask so starkly black that she'd looked around to no one there for confirmation, only certain the bird was real when it took flight. For a few weeks, she'd set out orange halves in hopes of the oriole's return, garnering only yellow jackets and a dread of attracting rats that put an end to her offering. Rats were a problem in this shipyard end of a one-time industrial neighborhood now best known for its chop shops and tire outlets, but at least she could put out birdseed without worry of squirrels. Penny liked to think that in an alternate life, she'd have spent her days observing nature, an Audubon-esque fantasy without regard for the years of study and endless need for funding that such a path required. A life in which afternoons of shifting light were spent drawing and making careful notes in a well-worn journal. Instead, she worked as a digital tech, retouching the blemishes off models and the imperfections of construction out of garments for Old Navy and the Gap. She had no knack for science or statistics, was miserable in anything but moderate weather, and knew there was no career in staring out your kitchen window. And yet, the image held, patience and stillness earning the great reward of a creature rarely sighted. And, of course, in her fantasy, there was always a partner or a team of naturalists with whom she'd reunite at the end of the day to share her discoveries. Yes, well, in the real world, there was Valley Splendor's Red River 50058, black oil sunflower seeds, a 20-pound bag, delivered by UPS to her door. What Penny hadn't counted on was a massive quantity of bird shit, coating the edge of the window box, streaking the siding of the house, lining the steps all the way down to the yard. She hadn't counted on their brutal bickering. She hadn't counted on the mourning dove. In more generous environs, an allotment that includes, for starters, a lawn, fallen shells turn to mulch, and, given enough sun, seeds tipped from a feeder will sprout. But in her small strip of urban backyard, what others might refer to as the alley, Penny had to sweep the debris from the cement below to appease her landlord. "Penelope," he complained in his accented English with ever-deepening concern, "you invite me the vermin." And the insipid mourning dove, always one and the same, she would swear, more identifiable by the way it looked at her than by familiar markings, was more of a scourge than any measly rat. At first, the dove, with its white-ringed eye, its smooth jacket of variegated gray, made for a comedy of scale, hanging back shyly as a smaller bird swept in and out of the open tray, and then suddenly taking wing with a clamorous flutter, its doleful cry abruptly silenced. She'd even felt a tinge of worry that the more audacious sparrows, with their chipping and chirping, would muscle the dove out. The feeder, in those early days, had drawn nothing more exotic than a pair of juncos. Still, Penny had been cheered, lingering over her morning coffee to watch the birds before heading off to the dimmed interior of the digital studio. And she would think of them nesting as she made her way home again in December's 5 o'clock darkness. Days filled with the tedium of Photoshop paths and selections, of vectors and grids, pixels snapped and colors corrected, her monitor hemmed in by endless rolling racks of clothing and accessories. But the weekends were hers, and she'd treat herself to a latte and a chocolate croissant from a nearby cafe. Surely, even a naturalist in the farthest reaches of New Guinea occasionally ventured into some village or town to sample the local specialties, to pick up a scrap of mail. On the weekends, Penny would sit in her kitchen, thumbing through her Peterson's Guide like a good luck charm as she watched and waited for new birds to arrive. Imagine her joy, her thrilled inhalation the first time she glanced up to see a purple grosbeak, or the dusty yellow of a lesser goldfinch. And then it seemed, in a single Saturday morning, word had gotten out. Suddenly, the feeder was filled with birds, pecking and squabbling birds, dashing at each other, dive-bombing the tray, and kicking seed to the ground with their scabrous little legs. A din of bird sounds that could hardly be described as song. And straight into this mayhem flew the mourning dove, seating itself in the middle of the tray, blinking its beady eyes and flinching as it hunkered down in the black bed of sunflower seeds. Penny flinched herself as the smaller birds rose up in a protest of fluttering wings, a tangle of tiny talons and beaks. A few days later, having called in sick, Penny set water on the stove for her morning coffee and became aware of the quiet. She turned to the window and saw the dove sitting fat and sassy in the tray of birdseed like a nesting hen, no other birds in sight. She walked over and rapped on the pane, and though the dove startled, it didn't move. "Pigeon," Penny said, her lips up close to the glass, meaning to insult the dove on its own avian terms. The dove merely cocked its head. The tray beneath the dove's feet was aluminum, of a variety commonly found in the housewares aisle of Northern California supermarkets, such as Safeway and Albertsons, and the window box, ragged with peeling paint, displayed swollen and cracked splotches of weather-darkened pine. Wooden steps led down to the cement walk of a back passageway, whose narrow width, though occasionally seen between housing units in this region of the city, was more typical of lower-income neighborhoods. Through the glass, notably distorted with small defects and variations in thickness, it was possible to view a kitchen, unexpectedly large, though of only standard utility. A 50s-style red Formica table and worn vinyl chairs, centrally located on the linoleum floor, decidedly in need of care. The sole occupant of this nearly vacant space, drably attired in heather gray sweatpants and tee, exhibited long periods of stillness, punctuated by erratic movement, indicating agitation or possibly distress. Gestures including, but not limited to, clenched fists, narrowed eyes, and a severe downturn of the mouth. Still peering through the glass, the dove dug its thin, curved beak into its breast, releasing a small gray downy feather that caught on the breeze and slowly drifted away. "Motherfucker," Penny said. Quickly unlocking the back door, she stepped outside in bare feet. She waved her arms and shooed, but not until she shook the window box did the gluttonous bully take off. Penny was aware of herself as a subject of study, of her environment observed, of the bird shit layered particularly thick on the midsection of stairs directly below her kitchen window. Justifying the excuses she'd made to beg off work, the spackling of excrement left her so queasy, she went back inside and turned off the flame beneath the kettle, forsaking coffee or nourishment of any kind. Let them starve, she thought, and returned to her bedroom, where she plumped the feather pillows and crawled back into the oasis of her bed.